Hi, I'm Mark, and today on Outside Views I want to talk about Brexit. Haven't done that for too long. When Great Britain left the EU, special regulations for Northern Ireland were laid down in the so-called Northern Ireland Protocol. It is indeed part of the Brexit deal for Britain's exit from the EU and stipulates that the customs border between the UK and the EU runs in the Irish Sea. And this was to prevent border checks between British Northern Ireland and the EU member Ireland, and that they have to be introduced there. But in particular, the exchange of goods between Great Britain and Northern Ireland has been increasingly criticized as too bureaucratic in recent years. The agreement reached between the EU and the United Kingdom in Windsor near London at the end of February in 2023, the so-called Windsor Framework, now provides for the checks on goods to be reduced in bureaucracy, provided they remain in Northern Ireland. And according to Prime Minister Rishi Sunak, there should be a so-called green corridor without customs regulations, especially for food and medicines. Only if it is intended that the goods will be transported to Ireland and thus to the EU, the full formalities must be complied with. EU Commission President Ursula von der Leyen from the German Christian Democrats called the agreement historic, and British Prime Minister Sunak was also satisfied with it. The Conservatives spoke of a new chapter in EU-UK cooperation, and ex-Prime Minister Boris Johnson, on the other hand, criticised the deal for locking Northern Ireland in the EU legal order. On March 22nd, the British House of Commons voted overwhelmingly in favour of the negotiated compromise, because the opposition Labour Party also voted in favour. Boris Johnson voted against, as did several other Brexit supporters. The starting point of the dispute was the protocol on Ireland and Northern Ireland, the so-called Northern Ireland Protocol, between the EU and the United Kingdom in 2020. And the protocol stipulated that after Brexit, there would be no customs checks between the North, which still belongs to the United Kingdom, and the EU member Ireland. Brussels and London said customs checks are jeopardizing the 1998 Good Friday Agreement that ended decades of conflict in Northern Ireland. The arrangement was intended to prevent a so-called hard border between the North and Ireland and a renewed outbreak of violent conflict between pro-British Unionists and pro-Irish Republicans over reunification of the island. In order to keep the land border open, Northern Ireland continues to follow the rules of the European single market, which no longer apply to the rest of the UK since Brexit. However, EU duties are generally incurred on goods entering Northern Ireland from another part of the UK or from a third country, because these goods can cross the open border into Ireland and with that into the EU. And this means that these goods have to be checked at the maritime border in the Irish Sea. So both UK customs and EU customs are responsible for these checks. And what increasingly bothered the British side about the Northern Ireland Agreement was that EU regulations prevented intra-British trade with Northern Ireland from working, let's call it smoothly. The protocol has brought difficulties such as shipping medicines and taking pets with you. And Great Britain also resisted the customs checks on goods exports demanded by Brussels. The new rules and checks and the associated higher costs resulted in supply disruptions from the British Isles to the Irish Isles. Then Prime Minister Boris Johnson, who negotiated the Northern Ireland Protocol himself and hailed it as a milestone on the road to Brexit, came under political pressure in 2021, and he promised remedy. We will do everything necessary to ensure that there is no border in the Irish Sea, if necessary by triggering Article 16. The UK government has repeatedly threatened the EU to suspend the whole thing with Article 16. And Article 16 of the Northern Ireland Protocol provides that some provisions of the agreement can be waived in the event of serious economic, social or environmental difficulties. But only Johnson's successor, Sunak, succeeded in demanding further negotiation on the protocol, on the implementation of it. But critics of the Northern Ireland Protocol generally assume that the rules effectively create a border within the UK and that Northern Ireland's supply will suffer as a result. The agreed product checks between Northern Ireland and the rest of the UK sometimes did lead to difficulties in trading individual products. Checks and customs formalities take time where no time was wasted before Brexit. And there are also problems with the delivery of postal items. In addition, supporters of the union with Great Britain in Northern Ireland felt disconnected from the rest of the country, although now we're dealing with feelings and negotiations. Public discontent culminated in threats against Northern Irish customs officials there, and for example, they were labelled target by a graffiti. And groups were observed collecting number plates from customs officials. Authorities were concerned because there was similar behavior in the Northern Ireland conflict. As a result, concerns were growing about abuse by union extremists. The agreement between London and the EU, the Windsor Framework Agreement, or for short Windsor Framework, is intended to further guarantee peace on the island of Ireland while ensuring easier trade in goods. The agreement thus represents a new version of the implementation of the Northern Ireland Protocol of 2020, which former British Prime Minister Johnson had agreed with the EU at the time. He still doesn't want to know that anymore. The Windsor Framework provides for significant simplifications in the checks of goods between Great Britain and Northern Ireland. So trusted traders should be able to import goods from Great Britain to Northern Ireland with greatly simplified regulations. That's just what they are called. In order to protect the European internal market and prevent a possible delivery of such goods to Ireland, the EU should have real-time access to UK customs IT systems and their databases to be able to carry out risk assessments according to an EU Commission fact sheet. And according to the British government, the new rules should be implemented gradually by 2024. The EU is already implementing a lot of this. The compromise includes another mechanism giving Northern Ireland's regional parliament a say in the application of EU rules. The so-called Stormont break, which was primarily intended to appease the largest unionist party, the DUP. The DUP smashed the regional government about a year ago in the dispute over the Northern Ireland Protocol, although they had other reasons, but they always said it was the protocol. The Stormont break, named after the location of Parliament House in Belfast, is a form of veto power for the Northern Ireland Regional Parliament. It can thus block the application of a new EU law in Northern Ireland if a group of MPs make a formal request to object. For the DUP, however, these rights of objection do not go far enough. And marking the 25th anniversary of the Good Friday Agreement, political scientist Peter Neumann colourfully said the Windsor Agreement would bury some of Northern Ireland's problems. The exchange of goods between Great Britain and Northern Ireland is becoming much less complicated now. And they indeed were bureaucratic hurdles. And it would be good if the Brexit issue would dominate the headlines less violently, said Neumann. The compromise has been and continues to be heavily criticized by Brexit hardliners and still the pro-British Democratic Unionist Party, the DUP, in Northern Ireland. For many pro-London unionists, the deal does not provide sufficient guarantees of Northern Ireland's sovereignty over EU rule. And their MPs voted against the new agreement with the EU in the House of Commons. The main unionist party, the DUP, continues to oppose the compromise between the EU and the Sunak government and is still blocking the formation of a government in Northern Ireland. Prime Minister Sunak originally hoped that the deal would also overcome opposition from the DUP. And the biggest Republican Party, as a consequence of the Windsor deal, the Sinn Féin party, demanded that there should be a government based on the power-sharing model of the Good Friday Agreement as soon as possible. But the DUP is still blocking it. And there's one part, they never understood the Stormont break and they never will the way they're making politics. That's why I still call the DUP don't understand politics, because they're just using the whole thing for their own internal Northern Irish political purposes. They are not the strongest party anymore, and that they don't like that. And that's the whole reason. And Sinn Féin is right. There should be a government, because the Stormont break cannot even be used without a formed government and an acting parliament. That is the biggest joke about the whole thing. The DUP is blocking their own ability to do something. But I never said the people of the DUP were the, what would I call it, the eclipse of intelligence, or whatever I have to call that. But you see, I'm lack of words when I have to talk about the DUP. That is not, there's no reasonable behavior at all in this whole thing. But nevertheless, I will leave it at that point and just quickly talk about the new channel, Outside Views STFC again. If you haven't watched it yet, you might just take a little view on it and see if you get a little bit interested in Star Trek via that way. You never know. It's quite fun to do these videos, and I still could need some support by my viewers. That's why the banner is still up there, to make some really interesting videos. But there will be more and more videos on this channel, even if they are quite complex to produce. But it's something that has nothing to do with politics. Even if when you're an admiral of an alliance in this game, you have to deal with tons of server politics again. There is a Senate and everything with votings and vote discussions and suggestion, voting request discussions and whatever's going on. And friendship deals, alliance treaties between these alliances. There's a lot of politics involved. But when I'm doing those videos, I'm not talking about the politics there. But if you're only interested in politics and not in STFC, the next video is right here in the end screen. I'll see you there. I'll be back.